The military personnel stood emotionless, until the woman's demeanor told of a war secret. The military courtroom in Washington, D.C., in August 1925, seemed to have absorbed the heavy, stifling air. Outside, gray clouds hung over the Capitol, with occasional light rain tapping against the windows. Inside, the dim light filtering through a single window fell into the center of the room, creating a tense shadow play. In this high-ceilinged, wood-paneled hall, every movement echoed, even whispers seemed to reverberate with a guilty hush. At the bench, seated upright in his pristine uniform, military judge Colonel Richard Hensley dominated the room with his cold blue eyes. His stern features carried the discipline and authority of years. The gavel in his hand, though yet to strike the desk, was something everyone in the room dreaded hearing. Across from him stood a woman, hands clasped in front, slender but standing tall. Maggie Donovan. Her prisoner's uniform, though worn, was immaculate, her hair was tightly gathered at the nape of her neck. There was a strange nobility in her demeanor, neither arrogant nor submissive, more like a rock standing silently amidst a storm. Behind her, stern-faced military police and intelligence agents stood in a row. Their uniforms were flawless, their boots polished, their faces stone-like. None seemed to look at Maggie, yet it was clear each was ready to stop her at the slightest movement. In the gallery, whispers circulated among the few spectators. "Another criminal," said an elderly naval officer to his colleague beside him. "Maybe it's not as simple as it seems," the other murmured, eyes fixed on Maggie. Maggie stood as if she hadn't heard the whispers. It was as though she wasn't in the courtroom, her mind somewhere far away. But the judge's firm voice cut through the silence. "Donovan, explain the nature of your crime." His words spread through the room like ice-cold water. Maggie slightly raised her head, locking her eyes with the judge's. A few seconds of silence followed. Then, with a subtle movement, she rolled up the sleeve of her right arm to her elbow. What appeared wasn't an ordinary tattoo. On her pale skin, though slightly faded by time, was a still distinct figure, an eagle with wings spread, poised to strike. Just below the eagle was a simple but starkly etched date, 1943. This sight sent an invisible wave through the courtroom. The soldiers behind her flinched for a moment, their facial muscles twitched. Some averted their gazes, others swallowed as if suppressing a memory. Because 1943, it was one of the bloodiest, darkest years of the war. Its shadow still haunted the dreams of many soldiers. Judge Hensley's brows furrowed. His eyes fixed on Maggie's tattoo, and his lips parted for a brief moment, but his sentence trailed off. Even for a man as composed as him, his fleeting surprise was noticeable. Who was this woman, really? And what story lay behind that eagle, born in which battlefield, on which dark night? As the interrogation progressed, a hint of curiosity was now evident in Judge Hensley's tone, alongside his initial cold authority. It was as if he was beginning to realize this case wasn't as straightforward as he thought. He lightly tapped his gavel on the desk, then leaned toward Maggie. "What does that tattoo tell us?" Maggie lowered her eyes for a moment. Her fingers were trapped in the cold metal of the handcuffs. She took a deep breath, slightly raised her head. Her voice, clear enough to echo in the room yet close to a whisper, said, "An old oath." Those two words fell into the courtroom like a heavy stone. Officers in the front rows exchanged glances, some spectators frowned. Whispers slowly spread. Judge Hensley searched Maggie's eyes, but he saw a closed door, a door hiding the past, hard to open. At that moment, Laura, a young journalist among the spectators, decided not to let this answer go. Her professional instinct told her this story was big enough to make headlines. That night, as light rain fell, Laura entered the old military archive building. The smell of dust and mildew lingered as she moved through the dimly lit shelves. Parchment yellow files were stacked in metal cabinets. With trembling fingers, Laura flipped through the catalog and found the line, "Margaret Donovan, 1943. The records were vague, many parts censored. Yet one document stood out. On the edge of a yellowed page, a handwritten note read, Sergeant Margaret Donovan, Intelligence Operation Raven, saved 100 soldiers under siege near the Normandy front. Known by the Eagle symbol post-operation. Laura's heart raced. As she examined the document, Maggie's upright posture in the courtroom flashed before her eyes. This couldn't be a coincidence. The next morning, Laura found Maggie in the courthouse corridors. The cold light reflecting off the walls highlighted the lines on Maggie's face. Her hands were still cuffed, but her stance was that of a soldier, not a prisoner. Laura, swallowing the lump in her throat, began. "Donovan, that tattoo. Did you save an operation in 1943? Maggie's steps paused. She slowly turned her head, meeting Laura's eyes. In her gaze, there was no anger, no denial, just deep weariness and the weight of the past. "Yes," she said. Her voice was like the rustle of wind through dry branches. But that secret was silenced with chains. Laura's breath caught. Were you that sergeant?" Maggie didn't answer. Her eyes flickered for a moment, then she lowered her head. This silence was a stronger confession than words. At that moment, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. The soldiers realized they weren't facing an ordinary criminal but a hero buried in the shadows of the past. And this disturbed them deeply. As Laura watched Maggie, she began to better understand her courtroom demeanor. She answered every question with calm clarity, never looking away. The lines on her face were not just from years but from war, loss, and heavy decisions. It was as if she wasn't at the bench but still on a battlefield, standing tall under the sound of enemy artillery. During a recess one day, Laura seized the opportunity. In a side corridor, she approached one of the officers providing court security. "What do you know about Maggie Donovan?" she asked boldly. The officer narrowed his eyes, glancing around. Lowering his voice, he said. "Margaret Donovan. A prisoner. Quiet, reserved woman. But, yes, there's something in her past." Laura pulled out her small notebook and mentioned the tattoo on Maggie's left arm. An eagle tattoo, with the year 1943 beneath it. The officer's expression changed for a moment. "Are you sure?" he said, almost whispering. "Yes," Laura replied. The officer pressed his lips together, pausing. During the war, such a symbol was only given to soldiers in special operations. There was a rumor she saved an operation. But the details were classified. This information sparked something in Laura. That night, in Washington's cold and windy air, she returned to the dark corridors of the archive building. Metal cabinets, sealed envelopes, dusty files. All silently bore the weight of the past. Laura found a 1943 file labeled Restricted Access, Operation Raven. As she examined the documents, the picture became clear: a critical intelligence operation near Normandy had faced collapse due to an enemy maneuver. Communication lines were cut, and soldiers were trapped under siege. Sergeant Margaret Donovan, defying orders, crossed enemy lines to restore radio contact and opened an escape route, saving 100 soldiers. But months later, a surprising line appeared in the reports: an investigation was launched against her for discipline violation and disobedience. Her heroism was overshadowed by a controversial disciplinary action in the records. Laura's heart pounded. Reading the signed document at the file's end dispelled all doubts. Sergeant Margaret Donovan. This was the woman she saw shackled in the courtroom. When Laura closed the file, one question swirled in her mind. Why was Maggie being tried here today? Was her goal only to defend herself, or to reveal a justice long hidden? After days of research and sleepless nights poring over documents, Laura submitted her evidence to the court. The courtroom's air was no longer the cold, distant atmosphere of the first hearings. Maggie was no longer seen merely as a prisoner. Behind her was a heroic story buried in dusty pages. One day, an elderly man in a long overcoat, leaning on a cane, entered the courtroom. His back was slightly hunched, his eyes heavy with years. He introduced himself as Paul, a former agent. When the presiding judge asked, "What do you have to say, Mr. Paul?" he turned to Maggie and said, "Margaret Donovan." His voice trembled slightly. Maggie nodded faintly. "In 1943, near Normandy, she saved me and my unit during an operation. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here." Paul recounted the event in detail. In the dead of night, behind enemy lines, under rain and in absolute silence. Maggie had moved alone to restore communication, opened the escape route, and led them out of the siege. The courtroom fell silent. This testimony, combined with the documents, prompted the court to reassess Maggie. A week later, a special hearing was scheduled. That day, the courtroom was packed. When the doors opened, Maggie entered, this time without chains. She still wore the simple prisoner's uniform, but her walk was like the first steps of freedom. At the bench, she quietly rolled up her sleeve to reveal the eagle tattoo. After a moment of silence, some soldiers in the room saluted her. Judge Hensley took a deep breath. His voice softened. "Ms. Donovan, I apologize for the injustice done to you." As the news spread through Washington, D.C. streets, more people gathered outside the courthouse each day, holding signs that read, "Justice." One morning, Laura handed Maggie a small piece of paper. It read only, "Justice is proud of you." Maggie took the note, looked at it for a long time, and smiled faintly. "Maybe the eagle flies free," she said. And that day, the court acquitted Maggie. The National Archives officially documented her story. The only sound breaking the courtroom's silence was the echo of an elderly soldier's steps. He stepped forward and took Maggie's hands. "You saved my life," he said, his eyes welling up. At that moment, Maggie cried for the first time. The burden she'd carried for years finally lightened. And the story was etched in memory with this question: have you ever known someone like Maggie? The silent hero of the courtroom?